Hello, I'm Joyce Woodworth. Welcome to the Spirit of Winona. Two of Winona's most colorful people of all time were Ben and Myrtle Huntley. They lived in Winona from 1910 to 1927, and during that time, the Huntleys were the king and queen of vaudeville in this area. Ben Huntley was one of the first filmmakers in the nation, producing films right here in Winona. The two of them together were probably the grandest entertainers Winona has ever enjoyed. With the help of Mark Peterson at the Winona Historical Society, I was able to piece together their fascinating life. Mark, tell me, how did you first hear about the Huntleys?
Well, out of the blue, almost 20 years ago, I received a phone call from actually their grandson, who was, I think, living in Virginia, and he called and said that he just came back to Black River Falls and had to put his father, Howard Huntley, who was Ben and Myrtle's only child, into a nursing home, and that they had always considered Winona their home, and he wanted to know if there was anything the Historical Society wanted. Well, that was the first time I had ever heard of Ben and Myrtle Huntley, and I, of course, said yes, I would be glad to take a look at whatever you'd have. So I immediately started looking into the story of Ben and Myrtle, and found out that they were from Winona and that they had had a vaudeville company, and Ben had made some movies, and I didn't know a lot until I got over to their house. And when I got to the home in Black River Falls, it was really one of those days I kind of lived for here, because it was very exciting to go in and basically be told, take anything you want. And he didn't want anything. He didn't even want his own baby pictures. He didn't want, and this seems strange to me in my business and my own interest, that I wouldn't want some of my own family history, but he didn't, and maybe just didn't have room for it. Mm-hmm. But in going through the home and going through the things that they had there, we discovered some old movie 35 millimeter nitrate film from some of the feature films that Ben was experimenting with and making back in the 19-teens. Myrtle's costumes, diaries, letters, all kinds of things, from cameras and makeup boxes, and just some really exciting things. And the more I looked into it, and the more we looked at the things that we have and talked to other people, we realized that we probably have one of the finest collections of material belonging to a vaudeville family from that period that anybody has. I don't think anybody, I'm sure that there's nobody in Minnesota, probably in the Midwest. It's probably one of the finest collections in the country, actually.
Myrtle Barnes was 16 years old when she met the dashing 20-year-old piano player, Ben Huntley. It was 1896, and Ben just joined the Brandon Medicine Show in Maryland, Wisconsin. Myrtle's stepfather, William Brandon, and her mother, Harriet, ran the traveling medicine show, which included a vaudeville act starring their lovely red-haired daughter, Myrtle. Ben fell head over heels in love with Myrtle, and 3 years later they married. His life from that point on was devoted to featuring his beautiful wife in whatever business he entered. His primary venture was vaudeville, and soon Myrtle and Ben separated from the Brandon show and traveled with their own Huntley shows. They traveled from town to town in the Midwest, pulling trailers and setting up camps. The trailers housed the troupe, the equipment, and the large performance tent. The people in the towns would flock to the shows.
Here they are now, back from the triumphal tour. Flying to the Archibald Ludington, Shakespeare,
Ladies and gentlemen, what a heartfelt welcome on our return home. I promise you the show we will present for you this evening will exceed all expectations. 9 brand new acts, and for a grand finale, a moving picture seen with the aid of the most elaborately constructed projection apparatus in the world today. There's none other like it. So come back this evening right here at Levy Park for an unsurpassed evening of instruction, entertainment, and fun.
Myrtle was the feature of every performance, and when Ben discovered photography and moving pictures, Myrtle became the feature of them as well. Ben's father-in-law liked new gadgets almost as much as Ben did and purchased a moving picture camera called an optograph. Ben discovered he could use it in his vaudeville act to project moving images on the wall for his audience. He also used it in Oshkosh in 1902, where he had taken a job with the Oshkosh Times as the advertising solicitor. He prepared an ad for a clothing store operator with a moving picture machine. That man, Carl Lemmel, was so enamored with the machine and what it could do that he tried to convince Ben to make movies with him and start a business called
Nickelodeon. What do you think of that?
What do I think of it? Nothing. I don't even know what it means.
Of course not. Nobody knows what it means. I'm the only one. I just invented it. But soon, everyone will know what it means.
Well, what does it mean, Carl? We haven't got all night, you know.
It means that any poor working stiff with a nickel in his pocket can go to the movies. At my new Nickelodeon theaters, that is. You see the beauty of it? You don't have to be rich to be entertained. The working man is just as good as Rockefeller or Carnegie. That's what this country is all about.
Nickelodeons? That's what this country is all about?
I see what he's getting at, Myrtle. You know, it's that the little guy has the right to some happiness and some entertainment too.
Yes, the pursuit of happiness. This is the only country that guarantees it. It's right there in the Constitution. That's why I came here. You know, in Germany, nobody cared whether Carl Lemmel was happy or not, or anybody else, for that matter.
But isn't that what vaudeville has been doing for all these years? Making people happy?
A few here, a few there, but I'm talking about big-time happiness. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people getting away from their troubles for a few hours in front of the silver screen. Here's where you come in, Ben. We could be making movies that real people want to see.
Carl Lemmel began the Nickelodeon in Chicago. It caught on and Nickelodeon theaters popped up all over the nation. For a nickel, anyone could see a 4 to 6 minute movie and a series of lantern slides for an illustrated song where the audience could learn the lyrics of a new song. Carl Laemmle eventually left Chicago and moved his studio to Hollywood, where he began Universal Studios and made full feature movies.
So he told Ben, you know, what we really should do here is you come with me, we'll go out to Hollywood. That's where this fledgling movie business was getting started out there, and let's make films together. And Ben said, no, you know, vaudeville is where it's at, film never going to be that big. Well, Ben stayed, and Carl went out to Hollywood and started Universal Pictures and became a multi-millionaire and was very successful. And
while Laemmle was opening Nickelodeons in Chicago, Ben and Myrtle were settled in Oshkosh until their son Howard was born. 13 months later, they hit the road again, taking Howard with them and also their new movie equipment. The Motiograph replaced the Optograph, and a new projector allowed Ben to make his own films, or flickers as they were called, which he included in his vaudeville act.
Ben was right on the cutting edge and starting to use the new invention of moving pictures. He never thought vaudeville would ever be replaced by film, and he just used it as kind of a way to entice people, a novelty to entice people to come in and watch vaudeville. Little did he know that the death of vaudeville was going to be the moving pictures.
They traveled throughout the Midwest, performing in halls, theaters, and under their big top tent. They featured vaudeville and their picture shows. Ben operated the projector from the middle of the tent, wearing a full dress suit with high collar, a white bow tie, and tails. Myrtle sang ballads and play-acted in elaborate costumes. Many of the songs she sang, the audience heard for the first time. The sheet music she used is part of the collection of the Winona Historical Society. The pictures on the covers show some of the costume ideas the Huntleys used in their vaudeville act. Myrtle's mother, Hattie, became part of their traveling troupe and was also featured in many of the Huntley shows. Their son Howard began performing with them, and when he was old enough, he also handed out playbills from door to door announcing the coming of the Huntley shows. One of the most bustling towns they performed in during this time was Winona, Minnesota. Located on the river, it brought entertainers into town by way of the steamboat and railroad. It was the fourth largest city in Minnesota, and people here enjoyed vaudeville. Thousands of residents would gather at the levee to welcome the new entertainers to Winona. O.F. Bullengame was the manager of the Winona Opera House. He brought many big-name performers of the time to Winona, including the Huntleys. When Howard was 8 years old in 1910, Ben and Myrtle thought it was time he had some permanent schooling. So they decided to settle in Winona and purchased a house at 171 East 4th Street. Tell me about the Huntley family in Winona. Tell me what kinds of things they did in Winona.
Well, Ben was involved in a lot of things. He was involved in one of his main interests was in photography, and he was an advertising photographer, really. He did a lot of work for Bay State Milling, Pioneer Tractor Company, Watkins, and that film, or that photography interest then sort of evolved into his interest with film. But he also did, advertising. He did some of the vaudeville shows. He was a projectionist. The opening night photograph that we have of the Colonial Theater, which is still in the building, still here over on Main Street, shows Ben and Myrtle in the upper windows behind the projectionist, and Howard Huntley, their son, peeking out of one of the windows in 1912. And he was putting on shows and involved in all kinds of productions at the Winona Opera House. I think he was just active in a lot of ways.
He was like today's advertiser, right?
Well, in a lot of ways, I think he was. You know, these companies needed somebody to take photographs and help promote their products, and his wife Myrtle, who was a very attractive woman, was used in a lot of those advertising. You see her standing on the back of a Pioneer tractor or a plow, or promoting Watkins products, that sort of thing.
When Ben was given an advertising assignment, he always used his lovely bride, Myrtle. Watkins was one of his best customers, and Myrtle is seen here advertising their Garda line of cosmetics. Myrtle had the perfect hair to inspire customers to buy Watkins shampoo. Her long, thick red tresses being brushed in front of a three-way mirror was quite inventive on the photographer's part. Ben captured Myrtle using the mirror technique in many photos. It was obvious he loved showing off her beauty from every angle. Some of his photos are quite risque for the times. For instance, the advertisement for Fremont chocolates. We see Myrtle about to take a bite of the candy as she lounges about in a see-through garment from breast line to toes. We see a more wholesome look on Myrtle as she bakes a pie advertising Watkins baking powder. Here we see a double promotion for a Watkins product and Wingold flour. Wingold was the primary brand of flour for the Bay State Milling Company. Before cars came into being, Winona Wagon Works was one of Winona's largest industries. Here we see Myrtle in her Princess Winona costume in an advertisement for that company. Besides using his camera to photograph Myrtle, Ben liked to capture interesting happenings on the streets of Winona. He ran his advertising and film business from his home, and he had his own developing rooms in the basement.
Well, I think Ben was probably a very hardworking, creative individual who was looking for opportunities all the time to probably make a buck. A couple of months ago, I had a call from somebody in Connecticut telling me that on eBay, somebody was selling some old magic lantern slides, and what it was a complete show that Ben put together on the sinking of the Titanic. Ben made a magic lantern slide with the Titanic superimposed on downtown Winona, and this slide shows the Titanic from, I think, Franklin Street all the way down to Huff Street, and that's about how big this thing was, and the river in the background.
We see an example of this creative technique in the picture he developed with the Watkins Administration Building superimposed in front of Sugarloaf. Ben actually made films right here on the streets of Winona, didn't he?
He did. There's one sort of Keystone Cop film that he was doing down on the intersection of Lafayette and 3rd Street with Merchants Bank in the background. There's a film he did out in the county fair, kind of an auto race out in St. Charles. There's another film, and I can't remember the titles of all these, but there was another one he did, I think, in the Wyndham Park Bed and Breakfast home. I think the one that Mr. Sebo was in was filmed in that house. Altogether, I think there were 7 or 8 different feature films that Ben did, in addition to some of these other ones that we have parts of, like a parade in La Crosse in 1913.
In part 2 of the Huntley story, which will be aired next week, we will learn more about the Huntleys' life in Winona. We will see one of Ben's feature films and will take a close look at the costumes worn by Myrtle Huntley. We will also find out why the Huntleys left Winona and more about the last years of their lives. This has been Joyce Woodworth. Thanks for joining me today. Please join me again next week when we will see the second part of the Huntley story. Till then, enjoy the Spirit of Winona. Hello, this is Joyce Woodworth. Welcome to the Spirit of Winona and the second part of the Huntley story. In last week's show, we learned about the beginning history of Ben and Myrtle Huntley, Winona's own king and queen of vaudeville. Ben Huntley was one of the nation's first filmmakers and made feature films right here in Winona. His studio was run from his home on 4th Street, where they lived from 1910 until 1927. Ben installed the projectors and developed a movie supply business for the theaters in Winona, such as the Colonial on Main Street, the Winona Opera House, the Princess Theater, and the Dream Theater on 3rd Street. He was hired in different towns in the Midwest to make tourist films or traveling newsreels, and he staged films using the surrounds of Winona. In August 1916, the Winona Republican Herald wrote an article about a comedy he filmed at the Bizon Stone Quarry, where characters were ground through stone crushers and dipped out of ponds with derricks. This is a still shot from that film, which has since disintegrated. One of the feature films Ben did create during this time was found in bits and pieces amongst the collection at the Winona Historical Society. I was able to piece it together in its proper sequence. It is probably the only film left of a full feature movie created by Ben Huntley. It stars Myrtle Huntley and her mother, Hattie Brandon. Hattie Brandon, Myrtle's mother, was a big part of the Huntleys' life. She lived with them and helped raise their son Howard, and she traveled with them and participated in their vaudeville acts and movies. The close relationship between mother and daughter was a part of the reason Ben and Myrtle did not go on to Hollywood to make full-feature films. The bigger reason, however, was that Ben refused to believe that movies would ever replace vaudeville. He used his movie equipment to make movie shorts and full-feature films, but they were used only to enhance his vaudeville show. On his bills or announcements of the coming vaudeville act, he stated, "We feature the new novelty, making movies in Hollywood." But he wrote a personal note at the bottom stating, "I have been convinced that vaudeville is the most popular type of entertainment today. Vaudeville means variety, the mixed program that pleases." Signed, Ben Huntley. In the 17 years the Huntleys lived in Winona, they were very active in the community. Myrtle taught an aesthetic dance class at the YWCA, and she and her class performed on the Mayo Estate in Rochester. Ben captured the dance on his motion picture machine. Dr. Will Mayo was fascinated with the film equipment and followed Ben around the whole time. Ben and Myrtle continued to grow their vaudeville act into the 1920s. Winona Wagon Works built their trailers for them where they would haul their equipment, which consisted of a large 60 by 90-foot bell ring top tent, stage equipment, a 5,000-watt lighting plant, an 8-piece orchestra, and a troupe of 21 performers. They traveled throughout the Midwest. Myrtle was always the star in the most beautiful costumes. Ben believed that half of show business was a good appearance and paid up to $100 for some of Myrtle's costumes. Some of these costumes were donated to the Winona Historical Society by the Huntleys' grandson. I'd like to introduce Jody Brome, who's the curator here at the Historical Society. Hi, Jody.
Hi.
Now, Jody, you are the one that was able to touch and go through all the costumes of Myrtle's. These are fantastic. Quite old, but quite fantastic. Should we start talking about this one?
This is one of my favorites in her collection.
Okay.
This is one of the dresses she's pictured in. It's made out of a silk and a satin, and you can tell how satin doesn't take the wear and the tear through ages. It's got cotton embroidery. Actually, they use, since it was a costume and a prop, this is like cotton twine that they use to decorate, and then the leaves are velvet. And the grapes that you see are basically, they're made out of metal. They're metal pieces stamped round and with punch holes that were sewn into clusters. And then there's padded grape. The leaves are padded green satin material stuffed with cotton.
Did she design her own costumes?
I believe she did.
Okay. And look at this, really kind of shows you how tiny she was. I mean, if you turn it around and look at the back with all the stays going, and if once they were put together, look at how tiny this woman was.
She was very tiny, and she had hair that went down to the floor.
Oh, beautiful red, thick
beautiful
hair,
red hair. She did a lot of ads for the Watkins Company for their shampoo and their makeup. The other one would be her Spanish outfit. This is the red satin. This is another, again, satin. And pardon me, this is silk. I always like to show how things wear through time, because these are close to 100 years old now.
Wow, but it's still in pretty
and the
darn
color.
good shape.
Look at how vivid the color is, the red.
Oh, yes, and it stayed that
I
color.
don't have
Beautiful.
the top to this. This would have had like a white blouse, but this is the skirt. Now the skirt, they've used just a cotton simple lace, and the underskirt is cotton. More of a coarser cotton, in fact. And size-wise, I believe now she would be a size 2.
Now, do you have the headpiece for this?
The headpiece is here. This one they made themselves. It actually has sequins sewn into it, which are cool. These are metal sequins, and there's some shell sequins here, because you can kind of tell how the way they shine. And they have the rhinestones in the headpiece. To make it stand, this went behind her head.
Okay.
And then this was in the front, so it would stand. And then this would drape down in the front like a Spanish light. It's also trimmed with some gold on the bottom, some gold ritrack. A thing you'll see with a lot of the costumes, they'll add sparklies, like the sequences and the rhinestones, so when the lights on stage will attract and catch them as they walk.
Sure. Now, was this rose part of the...
This rose was part of this, and this, I believe we have a picture of her holding the rose in her teeth with this outfit on.
So we could test this for DNA.
Yes, we could. We'd find some of her on there.
Okay.
One of her other dresses, very elegant, is her medieval dress. Now, this is made out of velvet and satin up here, and again, it's trimmed with all the finery. What's really cool about this time period, no zippers. The whole back, this whole back is all hook and eye.
Wow.
So you had a fun time getting into this. And it wasn't, I mean, this goes all the way down past the waist that you had to get the hook and eye hooked.
So this would have been in a medieval play of some sort.
Medieval play of some sort that she was in.
Gorgeous.
And you can kind of tell how tall she was by this one, too. If you go down to the floor a little bit for shoes, that's about how tall.
Ah, she was shorter than me.
And you can tell what they used inside of here as the basing. Where was the little hole? This is twine again that they wrapped and sewed the material around, and you can tell it wasn't it was hand stitched, not sewn with a sewing machine.
Wow, the workmanship is fantastic, isn't it?
Yep, here's the little piece. You can tell there's twine stuck in there.
Sure. Looks like they have little sachets sewn inside the dresses.
This would be like their deodorant. She would soak this in some perfume, and not, they wouldn't have deodorant, underarm deodorant. She can also tell by that's where our dresses are stained, but this would keep her fresh underneath the stage lights.
Jody, what's the green one here?
The green is a bathing suit.
Oh, a bathing suit.
Well, this would be the cover, well, the top. This is the top. This is made out of cotton, so when it got wet, it stayed wet. And these would be the bloomers for the bottom.
Oh, okay, look at these big bloomers.
Now those, I think the problem with these, well, these were for various sizes.
Oh, okay,
so you could pull them and tighter for her.
Oh, can you imagine swimming in this?
You would be weighed down with the water. Maybe more likely, maybe what you did, this was a thing that you laid on the beach, because you didn't want the sun to hit you back then at all. No suntan was the way you were supposed to be.
Okay. Is this a swimming suit as well?
No, that is a black slip that she black slip or probably a black nightgown. Again, you can see how small she was. But this is what she might have worn in one of the Watkin ads.
Really?
With her
that
hair.
was pretty risque, wasn't it?
Very risque. She'd sit at her dressing gown table and her hair would be spewed down over the back, and then she'd have this on.
Ben was a wonderful photographer and enjoyed taking pictures of Myrtle in lovely, skimpy, yet tasteful garments.
These are some wigs that more than likely the men wore, and I'm more assuming this is not human hair. It is horse hair, especially the black ones. This might have been worn by a female or a child. But they kind of work on the same way as, well, this one does, as a bathing suit cap.
Okay.
It's a little elastically, and this one is losing that where it can stretch. But I think it was like a person would have a receding hairline for this one, because it's got the skin color there, and then the red hair.
All manner of hairstyles for both men and women could be ordered from the Carl Kettler Wig Catalog. What do we have here? This looks like a makeup kit.
This is probably, I'm not sure if it was Myrtle's or Ben's, but it was a makeup kit that they had various little tools, the chalk. They'd have the brush. Our brush looks pretty disintegrated, but it's, they might put some coloring through their hair, black coloring. And
is this maybe
that
some
might
pancake makeup?
Pancake makeup, some powder.
Okay.
Very dark red powder, so it'll show up on stage.
Look at a little tiny comb.
Combs to brush through the mustache. They may use, the wax is here, that might be used for waxing points of the mustache. And, there's a couple different kinds of powder. This happens to be empty, but that's a brand that she used. This says it's a prevents large pores. So, and
Sort of the answer to retin-A today.
Yes. Myrtle's foot.
Tiny feet,
Very,
didn't she?
very tiny feet. I'm thinking a child of the rate that we grow now, that a child of 3 could probably wear those shoes. Wow. They're a size 1.5 AAA. Her feet were very, very narrow. And they also, most of her shoes all come from Chicago. Okay. And it seems to me that they were special made in Chicago. They don't really have a name brand in them.
Now, all women didn't have tiny feet like this, did
no,
they?
but the average shoe size, unusually small, but the average size is probably a 5 to a 6.
Now tell me about the corduroy outfit on the chair over there.
Okay, that is one of her outfits that she probably wore in one of the clown, as a clown. It has a bolero jacket, short with without sleeves. Again, it has a drawstring waist and on the pants that go with it. And I do believe she might have used this scarf to go with it.
Oh, okay.
This one. And you notice the fringes on the bottom is just yarn.
Oh, yes. Would this have been with this kind of a cowboy outfit?
Yes, this would have been. These are more likely Myrtle's because of it's a small hand. And this she might have worn. She might have even worn it with that. But there's another outfit, probably with this skirt, because this is the Western skirt right here. That she would have worn this. And I believe there's a picture of her in this with a leather vest. A lot of the clothing isn't lined. And you would think on stage with backlights you'd want lined clothing, but a lot of it isn't. She did one play where she was sort of like a maid, and this would have been that costume. And they must have not had slips to hold like we had the crinoline in the 50s. There's actually a piece of wire in here that would make the dress
make it
stiffer and stick out.
Okay.
And this.
Boy, that really shows how tiny she was. That looks like it would fit a little girl.
Yes.
Look at that.
And then you can see how it kind of sticks out here too when you hold it up.
Wow.
And this one happens to have shell buttons on the back too.
Okay.
The white shell buttons.
Probably dug out of Mississippi.
And this would have been the apron that would have went around.
Oh, really? Okay.
The front of it.
What do you suppose is the oldest piece that you have here?
The breastplates. She wore these with a costume. Actually, she was in this one when she wore these. She did wear a shirt that was skin colored. This would go over the top of to fit into the moral issues with. Even these might have caused a little stir when she showed up on stage. But they're not the lightest thing if you're going to wear these for more than an hour. But they crossed in the back, and this would hook in the front.
Oh, okay.
And you would get, let's see if I can. There we go.
Ah.
That's how they would fit on.
The breastplates were part of one of Myrtle's more exotic costumes. The Huntleys were fascinated with the theater and took in many theatrical productions in the big cities where they would get new ideas for their own costuming. They could then design or order a similar costume from a catalog. This one came with most of the accessories we see on Myrtle. However, we see a few of her own personal touches, such as the pearls that drop below her knees and the slave armbands with chains, which are also in the Historical Society's collection. The headpiece was also one of Ben's creations and certainly shows off the essence of Myrtle's beauty. Ben, with his photography skills, was able to capture Myrtle's beauty on film, color it in, and use the photo on his playbills.
That's a piece you see a lot in her pictures. It's always in fact, the cutout we have of Myrtle, she's wearing this pin. And I think it was one of her favorites because I've even seen it in one older picture of her.
As I searched through the photos of Myrtle, I found this pin on many pictures, primarily in her thick red hair, from a young age to a mature woman. This pin was obviously one of her favorite pieces.
This has huge shell buttons on it. And this is made out of silk, and it was probably worn a lot because you can tell by the wearing. In the front, in the bottom, and in the pockets. But the buttons are the unusual part, and also how big it is. That she wore something this big being so small.
Now I see you have everything lined with this Is it acid-free paper?
It's acid-free paper. It's an unbuffered paper. It helps preserve the garment. A lot of times if you store multiple things in a box, some items will bleed onto another. And it also keeps the item shape.
After touching all these gowns and being so close to her, what's your opinion of Myrtle?
It's hard to believe someone was so small, and she had very good taste in the clothing, like the shoes that she chose. Even though her foot was so small, her shoes were simple. They didn't draw a lot of attention, sort of different from what she had to wear when she was working. I think she did a good job of trying to keep everything together. You know, even though it was stored where it looked like she took really good care of it when she was wearing it.
And I'm sure she'd be very happy that it's in good hands here with you, Jody.
You always think about that when you're working.
Yes.
Do they like where it is?
Yes.
So.
I'm sure she would.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Tell me what happened to Ben and Myrtle.
Well, the story as I remember it is that Ben was on the road with the vaudeville company, and they were in Black River Falls, and it was in the early 1930s during the worst of the Great Depression, and having financial troubles, and I guess his vaudeville company went bankrupt. He couldn't pay anybody and couldn't move on to the next city, and so it disbanded in Black River Falls, and he he and his wife Myrtle lived there the rest of their lives, and he was a sign painter, and I think they were renting out rooms, and they made their life there.
Well, vaudeville pretty much died at the end of the 1920s, didn't it?
It did. When talking pictures came, and they just couldn't compete anymore, and it was a surprise to everybody. But when it died pretty fast.
Ben passed away in 1961, and Myrtle followed 13 years later. Even though they finished their lives in Black River Falls, they always considered Winona their home. This is where they spent the happiest time of their life, doing what they did best, vaudeville. This has been Joyce Woodworth. Thank you for joining me today on the second part of the Huntley story. Please join me again next week. Till then, enjoy the Spirit of Winona.